Hello there and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is L24 Midnight News and these are the headlines. The United Nations General Assembly on Wednesday voted to adopt a pro-Palestinian resolution to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Nakba, the Palestinian term of Zionist establishment. Turkish President Erdogan chairs the National Security Council meeting to discuss a possible ground operation in northern Syria. New York, Spain has stepped up security after revealing a number of letter bombs that have been sent to high-profile targets, including the Prime Minister. And in Qatar's Plenty of Surprises World Cup, Morocco and Croatia passed through the next stage as Germany, world champions 4 times, went out of the tournament from the group stage, just like in 2018 World Cup. Welcome again. Starting from Palestine, tens of thousands of Palestinians marched in northwest of Ramallah to mourn the death of 2 Palestinians killed by occupation forces during an overnight army raid in the occupied West Bank, city of Jenin, on Thursday. At least 4 Palestinians were arrested during the raid. The latest killings bring the number of Palestinians killed by the occupation forces since the beginning of the year to 210, including 158 in the West Bank and 52 in Gaza. The United Nations General Assembly, in its special session on the Palestinian issue, voted in favor of 4 resolutions for Palestine, on the top of which was holding a high-level session to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Nakba and mobilize international solidarity and support for the Palestinian people. Hussein Barkan.
The United Nations General Assembly voted in favor of 4 resolutions supporting the Palestinian cause, presented by Senegalese Ambassador Sheikh Nyang and Chairman of the United Nations Committee concerned with the Palestinian people exercise of their inalienable rights. On top of that, a high-level session was held to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Nakba within the Palestinian Rights Division of the General Secretariat.
We are so thankful, in spite of everything, that the increase of voting yes in all the resolutions was on the average between 8 to 10 votes in favor of these resolutions. This is a strong illustration that the international community is still committed to the cause of justice for the Palestinian people.
153 countries ratified the second resolution, which includes accepting the settlement of the Palestinian cause by peaceful means. Support also included unanimity on the establishment of the Committee on the exercise of the Palestinian people's inalienable rights by mobilizing international solidarity and support for the Palestinian people and advancement of a just, lasting and comprehensive peace.
To get us closer to the end line, to justice, to the end of occupation, and to the independence of the sovereign state of Palestine on the borders of the 4th of June 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital.
These decisions were welcomed by Palestinians, while it was considered an international recognition of the suffering of the Palestinian people and a step towards correcting the historical injustice that befell Palestine, country and people.
In the same line of thought, the permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations renewed before the United Nations General Assembly his country's support for the application submitted by Palestine for full membership in the United Nations and its efforts to hold the Zionist occupation accountable for its crimes.
The international community must intensify collective efforts to mobilize political and physical support to enable the Palestinian people to stand firm in the face of the crimes and violations they are exposed to, with confirmation of Algeria's full support for the request made by the State of Palestine to obtain full membership in the United Nations and support in its efforts to hold the Israeli occupation accountable for its crimes.
Al-Arabawi also reviewed Algeria's efforts to unify the Palestinian lines by signing the Algerian Declaration for Unification and Achievement of Palestinian National Unity.
عملت بلاد الجزائر
Algeria has worked to unify the Palestinian lines, and with the personal and direct auspices of His Excellency, President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, by hosting rounds of dialogue and reconciliation between the Palestinian factions, which made it possible to establish a consensual ground to turn the page on the Palestinian division, and resulted in the signing of the Algiers Declaration emanating from the Reunification Conference in order to achieve Palestinian national unity, which aims to unify the Palestinian lines around the recognized references.
Libyan Prime Minister Abdel Hamid al-Dabeiba met with his Tunisian counterpart Najla Bouden in Tunis on Wednesday. The two leaders focused primarily on Libya's debt owed to Tunisia, facilitating border crossing and promoting trade between the two countries. Dabeiba unveiled that they had agreed on a deal to settle all the Libyan states' debts to Tunisia and to unify customs procedures.
We have a lot of debts, and yesterday we decided to settle all these debts. In the field of electricity, we have an $85 million debt, which we agreed to pay off over the next days. 30 million in the field of civil aviation, Tunisian hospitals with around $85 million, and God willing, we'll pay them off before the end of the year.
The National Association of Lawyers in Morocco announced its participation in the popular march called for the Moroccan Social Front next Sunday in the capital Rabat, calling on all lawyers to participate extensively in this march. This popular march comes as a protest against the high prices that Moroccan people live in. Lebanese lawmakers failed for the 8th time to elect a new president amid the country's political deadlock that prevents reaching a consensus on a new president. The voting session was attended by 111 lawmakers of 128 parliament members. A candidate needs 2/3 of the vote, or 86 lawmakers in the parliament, to get through the first stage, while an absolute majority is needed in subsequent rounds. Lebanese has facing since 2019 a crippling economic crisis considered one of the worst in the modern times. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan will discuss with the Turkish National Security Council a possible operation of the Turkish armed forces in northern Syria. Turkey is currently launching an air operation against Syria wing of the Bound Kurdistan Workers' Party in Turkey in northern Syria. The National Security Council will be the last meeting for this year. U.S. Special Envoy for Iran, Robert Miller, revealed on Wednesday that President Joe Biden was ready to resort to a military option to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon in case sanctions and diplomacy failed. Miller noted that the indirect negotiations between Washington and Tehran stopped after Iran made additional demands that had nothing to do with the essence of the nuclear agreement.
We will have the sanctions, we will have the pressure, and we will have the diplomacy. If none of that works, the president has said, as a last result, he will agree to a military option, because if that's what it takes to stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, that's what will happen, but we are not there.
In a different matter, Pakistan on Thursday demanded neighboring Afghanistan's Taliban rulers prevent terrorist attacks coming from their soil. A day after a suicide bombing in Pakistan's southwest sent a wave of shock and anger across the country. The bombing killed 4 people and appeared to target police protecting polio workers in the area. Islamabad blamed the attack on the Pakistani Taliban fighters who are hiding across the border in Afghanistan.
See, this promise is not only for us, but for the whole world. The Taliban promised the whole world that the Afghanistan soil would not be used for any terrorism. If Taliban follow it, it is not only in the benefit of Pakistan, but it is their own benefit if they want to go with the world.
To the European continent, Spanish police department were investigating Thursday a series of letter bombs sent to targets including the Prime Minister and the US Embassy amid reinforced security measures in the country. Mohammed Khat.
Spain has stepped up security measures at consulates and public administrative buildings in the country after at least 6 letter bombs were mailed to several offices, including those of Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez and the American and Ukrainian embassies. The Spanish government earlier reported that explosive devices had been sent to 5 targets, including the Prime Minister. It said an envelope containing pyrotechnic material had been sent to Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez but was intercepted before anyone was hurt. Spain's Deputy Interior Minister Rafael Pérez said in a press conference that the letter bombs were homemade while calling on people to show utmost caution.
The material is homemade. The material of the 5 envelopes is the same in all of them. Regarding the delegate's statements yesterday, which I have just said, is that there is an appearance that they have been sent from the national territory, but I insist on caution.
Spain is investigating the incident as a possible terrorist act. However, Rafael Pérez ruled out the fact of calling a meeting of the Terrorist Assessment Board. With regard to raising the terrorist alert, I do not believe that the facts are such as to call a meeting of the Terrorist Alert Assessment Board. Regarding the explosive potential, I think the terminology issue is important. If we say inflammable, it is because the pyrotechnic material included in the envelopes can cause a fire, not an explosion, a flash flame. The Interior Ministry said in a separate statement that increased security measures will vary but will include more security patrols and agents and specific alerts for mail carriers to better filter mail.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on Thursday that the West had a real chance to avoid conflict in Ukraine, but had chosen to spurn Russian proposal to halt the expansion of NATO and agree a special security status for Kiev. Lavrov made the comments during a news conference in Moscow. The West says Russia's proposal made in the run-up to the Ukraine conflict were unrealistic and insincere.
When we understood that NATO countries ignore those political declarations, that they have the right not to pay attention to them, despite the fact that their presidents signed them, we then offered, in 2008, let's codify those political declarations to make them legally binding. But we were answered, no, legally binding guarantees can be delivered in Europe only within NATO. So the reckless course of artificial enlargement of this bloc, when there were not any threats for NATO members, was pursued quite consciously, quite deliberately.
Lavrov also accused NATO of raising up tensions near China in a way that posed risk for Russia. He said that this is the reason why Russia was developing a military operation with China and conducting joint exercises.
The South China Sea is now becoming one of those regions where NATO is not adverse, as they once did in Ukraine, to escalating tensions. We know how seriously China takes such provocations, not to mention Taiwan and the Taiwan Strait. And we understand that NATO's playing with fire in these regions carries threats and risks for the Russian Federation.
The US President Joe Biden and his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron presented a united front Thursday at White House despite the two countries' differences. Biden hosted Macron for the first time, or rather for a first state visit of his presidency, where both showed a renewed commitment for unity. Nabil Khazini on What Follow.
For the two leaders, the nightly dinner between Joe Biden and Emmanuel Macron was a display of a return of diplomatic ties after a transatlantic spat.
Why did you choose President Macron for your first state visit?
Because my friend.
But on the following day, the table at the White House had a menu of another kind, full of global issues to be discussed, on top of them the conflict in Ukraine. US President Joe Biden hinted of a possibility to hold talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I'm prepared to speak with Mr. Putin if, in fact, there is an interest in him deciding he's looking for a way to end the war. He hasn't done that yet. If that's the case, in consultation with my French and my NATO friends, I'll be happy to sit down with Putin to see what he has in mind.
The war in Ukraine has drawn Washington and Paris closer than before. Both head of states reaffirmed their nation's continued support for Kiev for as long as it might take.
We will follow up our own support. We increased our military support. We increased our economic support. We are increasing our humanitarian support.
The two countries have also displayed their union on the other international issues, saying they coordinate their response to the challenges posed by China and to work with Beijing on important global issues such as climate change. The Biden-Macron meeting was a so good opportunity not to be seized to show the deep affection between France and the United States. However, some experts say that Macron's visit shouldn't serve as a mask for differences and that a wide array of bilateral tensions remain between Washington and Paris, many of which have no easy solution in sight.
Chinese President Xi Jinping held talks with visiting presidents of the European Council in the Chinese capital on Thursday. Charles Michel once again urged Chinese President Xi Jinping to use Beijing's influence on Russia over its special military operation in Ukraine. During the meeting, Xi said that his country will carry on his legacy and continue to consolidate and develop China-EU relations.
Xi, for instance, made very clear that China is not providing weapons to Russia. President Xi made very clear that the nuclear threat, is not acceptable and is not responsible. This is, I think, an important message. And I sincerely hope that in the following weeks and months, all the international community, China included, will use all possible tools and instruments to advocate in order to convince the Kremlin and Russia to end the war and to respect the sovereignty of Ukraine.
Police dispersed a march against the United Nations in Goma on Thursday, while dozens marched demanding that UN's mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo leave. The demonstrators said that after 20 years of MONUSCO's presence in the country, things have not changed or had gotten worse. Some protesters clashed with police officers during the demonstration. The protesters also called on the international community to take action to stop the war in Eastern Republic of Congo.
Today, we are denouncing the complicity of the international community, the complicity of MONUSCO, as well as the complicity of the EIC. Its force came to our country to fight alongside the FARDC. But since the ultimatum given to the M23 rebels expired on Sunday, we have noticed the inactivity of this EIC force.
And now for more international news, let's follow this roundup by Marwa Blaour.
Hundreds of demonstrators gathered in Pristina, capital of Kosovo, to demand that the institutions take their responsibilities and toughen their responses to feminicides. These came a day after the murder of a 35-year-old pregnant woman who was shot several times by her ex-husband.
Domestic violence must be taken more seriously by society, especially by the police and all institutions, so that such incidents do not happen again in the future.
Chilean President Gabriel Boric stated on Thursday that the country had legal certainty regarding a river dispute with Bolivia after a ruling from the International Court of Justice at The Hague was decided. The UN highest court found little to rule on in a long-running dispute over a small river which flows from Bolivia to Chile.
We will promote the continuity of the agenda of the rapprochement with Bolivia. We intend to deepen relations to improve them. It is an important neighbor for us. We have many questions on which we have to work together.
One person was killed and 4 injured when a rock wave hit a cruise ship south of Cape Horn, the Norwegian company Viking announced on Thursday. The accident happened at 10:40 p.m. Tuesday when the vessel Viking Polaris was hit by a rock wave, according to the company. Swaths of Brazil's southern state of Santa Catarina is underwater on Thursday as heavy rain lashed the region. Over 880 people from the area have been evacuated after rains turned streets to rivers, Santa Catarina Civil Defense reported. 70 cities in the state have declared a state of emergency.
The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, included Thursday in the Moroccan capital Rabat, Rai, as an Algerian folk song in the list of the World Intangible Heritage of Humanity. This came during the 70th meeting of the Intergovernmental Committee for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage, which will last until December the 3rd.
إن تسجيل الراي كغناء شعبي من الجزائر على قوائم التراث اللامادي للإنسانية.
Classifying the song Rai as an intangible Algerian cultural heritage for humanity is a victory for the Algerian cultural and artistic scene. Algeria deservedly achieved a global cultural gain after the approval of the UNESCO Committee to register the song Rai as an Algerian intangible cultural heritage for humanity. And with this classification, it is given Algeria a decisive testimony to the world's recognition of this cultural musical genre and confirms its undisputed Algerian authenticity. With its novelty, poetry and musical diversity, it is a message of love and peace for all humanity.
وبنغمات إنسانية تروي طموح الأجيال.
Ending up our news bulletin with the FIFA World Cup in Qatar 2022. An emotional Moroccan team clinched a spot in the last 16 of the World Cup for the first time since 1986 by defeating the already eliminated Canadians 2-1 on Thursday. Morocco, who needed a win or a draw in their final Group F, managed to reach the knockout rounds, which, with Croatia drawing with Belgium, would rank number 2 to be eliminated from the group stage with 4 points out of 3 games. Morocco finishes first in the group with 7 points and will face the second-place finishers in Group E, Spain, which is Germany, while Croatia will be playing against E Group leader Japan. Germany sensationally crashed out of the World Cup despite beating Costa Rica at Al Bayt Stadium, with Japan stunning Spain to send Dutch team home at group stage in just like 2018. Hansi Flick's team knew nothing less than a victory could send them into the last 16, but Japan's win in the other game meant they faced the unlikely task of making up 7 goals on Spain. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. For more updates, you can follow our social media platform. And for now, good night.